America. Everyone knows it's the greatest nation on earth, and our leaders are the greatest leaders on earth. But did you know there are other countries that are not America, and each of them has a leader of its very own? Let's take a moment to meet one in our ongoing series, Other Countries, Presidents of the United States. This week's leader, Tony Abbott, Prime Minister of Australia, the island nation famed for its bouncing kangaroos and bloomin' onions. Its current leader, hardline right-wing Prime Minister Tony Abbott, who rose to power promising to be pro-business and religiously anti-immigration. Literally, religiously anti-immigration.
Jesus knew that there was a place for everything, and it is not necessarily everyone's place to come to Australia.
Exactly. Australia is for real Australians, like Tony Abbott, who was born in London, England. It's that kind of rhetorical consistency that's won him the admiration of his predecessors.
If Tony Abbott ends up the Prime Minister of Australia, I mean, you've got to say, God help us. God help us.
Tributes in song. And the love of Australia's children.
My mummy calls him Tony Dum Dum because she thinks he is so, dumb.
What is it about Tony Dum Dum that's led to his current approval rating of 30%? Could it be that he's personally insulted everyone else in the country, from women...
The housewives of Australia need to understand as they do the ironing.
...to gays.
Homosexuality. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I probably feel a bit threatened.
To anyone remotely Irish.
This government's a bit like the Irishman, who lost £10 betting on the Grand National, and then lost £20 on the action replay.
To elderly, cancer-ridden phone sex workers.
Tony Abbott has been filmed winking during a radio show.
I'm a 67-year-old pensioner, 3 chronic incurable medical conditions, 2 life-threatening, and I work on an adult sex line to make ends meet.
To incredibly this.
Tony Abbott has been caught out seemingly insulting a Queensland soldier killed in Afghanistan. After being told about the complications of the firefight, this is Mr. Abbott's reaction.
Sometimes shit does happen. Luckily, Tony Abbott is a master of words and can talk himself out of any situation.
Look, a soldier has died. And you shouldn't be trying to turn this into a subsequent media circus.
How's that turning into a media circus? Okay, well, tell me, what's the context? And if it's out of context, what is the context? You're not saying anything, Tony.
I've given you the response you deserve.
Yes, Tony Abbott knows one panicked, pants-shitting expression is worth 1,000 words. And what a way with words Tony Abbott has.
No one, however smart, however well-educated, however experienced, is the suppository of all wisdom.
But if anyone is the suppository of wisdom, surely it's Tony Abbott, a man who always knows exactly what to say or not to say, and who's won exactly as much respect from his constituents as he deserves.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
So, Jesus, Lauren Southern's South African farmlands documentary came out recently, and I've mentioned it on this channel before because she's been sharing clips leading up to the documentary's release of various people she interviewed to enforce her Great Replacement white genocide narrative, which is basically that the white race is under assault from dangerous colored people who have stolen their rightful place of authority in various nations. What I want to talk about today is specifically how that narrative feeds a derangement and hysteria. Ex-Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott at one point said that the number was 400 South African farmers had been killed this year. And there was a debunk that I'm going to list in the description that brought the number to 84 farmers for 2017 last year, because obviously we don't have complete 2018 statistics yet. But the year where he mentioned the number 400 white farmers is it wasn't even 84 white farmers, it was 59 of those 84 murdered farmers were white. And it's a tragedy that these people are being attacked, robbed, murdered, raped. Children are being harmed in this crime wave that is hitting these South African farms. But I would say that it is very strange for the right wing to talk out of both sides of their mouth at a time where immigrant populations, whether they're from Africa leaking into Europe because of crisis, financial crises, or war, predominantly war in North Africa, they wipe their ass with pity, with our feelings of pity for those people. It doesn't seem to matter that those people are suffering or starving in much greater numbers. Again, white genocide in South Africa is less than 100 people, apparently, less than the murder rate in New York City. You probably could make a better case that more white people died. There was more white genocide in New York City, like literal murder of white people, than South Africa. So I'm not pissing on white South Africans. I'm not saying that they deserve to be punished for apartheid. This is not a proper comeuppance for that. This won't heal any wounds, this random raping and pillaging and killing of these people. And the people that are doing it are not political. What's happening here is poor people, who have been abandoned by the government and law enforcement, are basically taking, extreme measures to get by. This is a degeneration of the social contract based on poverty. But Tony Abbott, a notoriously dumb right-wing Australian politician, is just kind of one example of this whole thing of, sometimes they say that, the UN definition of genocide. The UN definition of genocide isn't less than 100 dead people in a fucking year. Genocide, is about, firstly, systematic extermination, meaning deliberate executions of people from the paramilitary or military forces. The bandits robbing these fucking farms are not a paramilitary force. They're not organized enough. And they certainly are not a military force. They are not subsidized financially from the South African government. They're not working under the direction of, if you want an example of a paramilitary force for, the Philippines, right? Right now in the Philippines, President Duterte is carrying out extrajudicial killings of drug addicts and drug dealers. And that's ethnic cleansing, and that's a genocide, and that is being carried out by military and paramilitary forces, particularly paramilitary forces, because the president of the Philippines put out a bounty for murdered drug dealers and has been encouraging gun ownership and vigilantism. And I would come out against that if that was happening in South Africa, that the president of the country was arming these bandits. If there was some kind of evidence that that was happening, I would come out against that, because I don't support that. If the South African government was themselves using military power directly to exterminate the Boers in South Africa, I would be outraged. I don't think that those people deserve that kind of treatment. What I will say is that it's kind of strange for the right wing to kind of, after all these years, of pissing on the left for about us being crybabies for the suffering of marginalized people, that as they imagine becoming a minority, that now they want to know why we're not sounding the alarm for their imagined genocide, because you still do not have in any place in the world a situation where white people are being targeted for ethnic cleansing. White genocides, the white genocide that everyone is bitching about on that side is the white women having consensual sex with non-incel brown men. That's genocide to them. And, it's such an insult to people who have endured actual genocide, actual ethnic cleansing during the Holocaust. They laugh at that. They meme that to hell and back. The same people that are bitching about, why aren't you crying about the Boers? Why aren't you crying about the death of these white South Africans? They're the same people that are memeing the internment and dehumanization of South American immigrants who are being deported and being rounded up by a United States Gestapo. They think that's funny, but they still are very mad. Their skin on this issue is paper thin. If you do not react the way they want you to react to this, which is to burst into tears over the suffering of white babies, they point their finger at you and don't seem to sort of comprehend that they themselves have delegitimized this kind of public pitying of victims. The right wing, since forever, but I guess you could, draw a line for the last 20 years, and in the regards to immigrants, have delegitimized the idea of mercy and delegitimized the idea of suffer the little children. So now that they want to pull it because this particular crime wave favors a white genocide narrative. It favors the idea that blacks are conspiring to take revenge, which they haven't done in the United States for over 100 years. There still hasn't been any coordinated efforts to get revenge for slavery. The only thing that black Americans have asked for that I'm aware of is reparations. But they have not, no one has... even black nationalists in the 1960s have not run run into politics on Kill Whitey. So the same thing with African apartheid. It's the revenge that never comes except in the imagination of the post-apartheid white person who's just trying to use the specter of white genocide to erase the actual history of white South Africans actually oppressing and marginalizing and exploiting black South Africans under apartheid. Have no doubt about it. What Lauren Southern is doing here is trying, with her Farmland documentary, is trying to create a counter-narrative about who white South Africans are, what the legacy of apartheid was, and almost sort of implying that it was a mistake to end apartheid. Now, I'm not a big fan of the ANC after they took power. I think that they've made a lot of logistical mistakes, and I think that they've done very poorly on the issue of, restoring economic equality between blacks and whites. As far as the land expropriation program goes, there's a functional way to manage that where you don't just throw the Boer out into the wilderness, because there should be redistribution of wealth, but I don't think it should be directly land-based. I think it should be done through taxation in this case. I think it'll be a lot less bloody, and I think that it will be a lot less personalized if it's done through already existing taxation. So, you know, when people tell you that there's a genocide going on in South Africa, tell them that less than 100 people a year being killed by random criminals is not genocide. It's burglary.